The notion of being versus doing as a psychological map or a psychological model is very, very simple, and it's nice to work with. It can, however, very easily become confusing. It can become confusing when we think about it. Now that's a bit odd, because we always would say that it's necessary to think about things in order to clarify whatever it is. But in this case, it's not helpful to think about the dichotomy of being versus doing. It's actually a disaster. And the reason for that is thinking is a doing. So straight away, whilst paying lip service to the fact that there is this division between thinking and doing, we've sneakily put doing on top again without ever admitting it. And that makes everything useless. That makes this, as a way of seeing things, completely pointless. It doesn't do us any good at all. It's just another thought. It's just another construction. It's just another construct in a world full of untold billions of constructs. None of these constructs are going to help us mental health wise. Obviously they can help us in other ways, but mental health wise, having mental constructs, forget about it. That's just doing. Whilst it very often can be necessary, doing isn't where it's at. It's not very interesting. Doing is just doing, and we're doing stuff all day long. Being, on the other hand, really, really is interesting. It's fantastically deep and fantastically interesting, and we hardly ever experience it. We have it as a concept, but that's about it. Just as we might have anything else for a concept, such as freedom or happiness, all these concepts. And we kind of imagine, because the concept or construct is of freedom, that there might be freedom in it, but there isn't. Or if I have a concept of happiness, and I place this in my psychological model, that validates the model, because happiness is something we all want, but there is no happiness in this concept of happiness. And the more seriously we take that concept of happiness, the more dismally unhappy we will inevitably become. So there is this trickiness that goes on in the way that we always put thinking on top. We always, without recognizing that we're doing so, we make thinking into the supreme arbitrator, which it really should never, ever, ever, ever be. It's a useful thing, but it shouldn't be on the throne, like God Almighty. So one way to illustrate how we make this mistake is to think about all the stuff people say about meditation or mindfulness, and just to pick one thing that we do tend to say a lot about mindfulness. We say it's a skill. We might say other things about it, but very often we'll say it's a skill. And that's a sneaky way of taking the good out of mindfulness. It's sneaky because it sounds like we're saying something good. We're saying, hey, here's a really good skill. Here's a really cool skill. You should learn it. It'll be really helpful for you. It sounds like we're putting it up there and saying good things about it, but we're not. We're turning it into something else. We're turning it into just another artifact of thought. Why, we could ask, or we probably would ask if we could be bothered to ask, isn't mindfulness a skill? Why wouldn't it be? Sounds like a skill. Some people go to mindfulness classes and they learn mindfulness, so why can't we say they've learned a skill? And the very simple answer is, it isn't a skill because it isn't a doing. only doings can be skills. And as I've said before, the reason we like doing so much is because it glorifies the concept of the doer. And our whole lives basically are all about glorifying the concept of the doer. We can't help that. It's our basic impulse, and we're completely unaware of that basic impulse. We think we're doing something else, something above board, something fine, something beyond reproach, but really we're glorifying the doer all day long, glorifying the doer, or validating the doer, if we want to put it like that. To be a doer is a great thing, because if I do something successfully, and I can say, I have done it, look what I've done, and that validates the sense of their self-construct. It makes that self-construct feel all warm and cozy inside. It's really nice for the self-construct. It feels really good about that. It's lovely and warm and yummy. The self-concept thrives on being glorified. Either others can glorify my self-concept, or I'll glorify it myself, because you can't always find other people to do that. Sometimes they do the opposite. Sometimes they try and bring you down, spoil your buzz and say bad things about you. And actually, that could be true when I rely on myself to glorify my self-construct, because that can flip over and I can find myself bringing myself down and slagging myself off and saying bad things about myself just as easily. But anyway, coming back to mindfulness, it isn't a skill, because it isn't the output of any purposeful activity. It's not produced by some mechanism, by doing this and then doing the other thing, and it's not produced by following the formula or following the instructions. Even though when we start to learn meditation, we will be given instructions. It's kind of like a necessary beginning, because we would get confused otherwise. But later on, if I really am learning meditation and not some kind of gimmick that's supposed to be meditation, I will see something very interesting. And what I'll see is the state that I'm trying to produce is there all along. And it's there all along, and we spoil it for ourselves the whole time by trying to catch it or trying to improve it. So this is our basic human dilemma. That being, the state of being, which is so rich, overflowing with abundance, you could say. No, it's a completely stupid word as far as I'm concerned. People love abundance, but really it's when we talk about loving abundance and trying to attract abundance, that's the impoverished little ego speaking, because the impoverished little ego is fascinated with abundance, because that's the one thing it never has and never can have. So that's why there is this constant use of the word by the self-concept. It's almost like if we're really poor and we talk about wealth a lot, that will make us wealthy, but it doesn't. It just titillates us in some kind of a way. So what we discover is that there is this thing which you could call the basic human dilemma, which is that by always trying to make it right for ourselves, grasp it or improve it, or kind of solidify it or make sure of it, secure it, we ruin it for ourselves. So what meditation really means is learning not to do that, just to let it be, as in the Beatles song, just to let it be. It sounds ridiculously easy, but it isn't, because our entire lives are a habitual reflex a very, very, very powerful and well-established reflex to benefit ourselves. So, just to let it be is going against this immensely well established reflex. It's not so easy at all. It's a reflex, which means we can't stop ourselves doing it. We will do it time and time again, and we'll keep on doing it because it's all we know how to do, and we've been doing it since we've been very small in various ways. Sometimes in crude ways, which backfire immediately on us. Sometimes in subtle, sophisticated ways that seem to actually benefit us, although it never does, but it can seem to. And in life, we probably learn that the crude attempts to benefit ourselves backfire, so we give up on them, and then we move on to the more sophisticated types of trying to benefit ourselves. For example, we might try to be compassionate and kind and insightful and sensitive and all of that in order to benefit ourselves, and that's a more sophisticated way of trying to benefit ourselves. So, in the same way as that, the attempt to let it be also gets hijacked. You could almost say it's inevitably going to be hijacked by the attempt to benefit ourselves. So we attempt to let it be in order to benefit ourselves. The whole point is that when you let it be, that's good because there's being, and being is full of depth and wonder, and it's everything we haven't got. It's actual reality. It's actual reality, and rather than this mind-created world that we live in the whole time. Being is the actual reality, so we perceive that will make life a lot better for us, and so we try to cultivate letting it be in order to benefit ourselves. And the reason I'm saying all that is, of course, just to show that when we do it like that, doing is on top again. We've turned it into a doing. We're trying to do the letting it be. And this all just goes to illustrate that it's kind of not as simple as it might sound. It can get very confusing. It's not even that it's like a habit that's deeply ingrained. It's the way we are. It's the way the ego is. It's the way the self-construct is. It is founded upon self-benefiting. It is the very essence of grasping. The everyday self that we are is the very essence of grasping. To ask it not to grasp, or to ask it not to judge, or whatever way we want to look at it, or not to think, not to evaluate, not to analyze, is asking the self-construct not to be the self-construct. And clever and tricky as that self-construct is, it can never not be the self-construct, and it's unfair for us to kind of put that pressure on it. That's totally ridiculous. And in our everyday lives, we are that the self-construct. It's no good trying to delude ourselves that we're some kind of etheric spiritual being or not, or something like that. It sounds pretty nice to be an etheric spiritual being. I mean, I definitely agree with that. It does sound very nice, but it's not a realistic starting point. If I was an etheric spiritual being, I wouldn't need to learn meditation. I wouldn't need to learn anything. And the whole question wouldn't arise. No questions would arise. All of our habitual concerns are about remedying the deficits that are implicit in the self-construct. And that whole thing just never arises, obviously, if we're not subject to these deficits. It's like saying our love of goals and achievements sounds glorious, but it isn't, because it's just because of our inner sterility, our inner barrenness that we're so keen on achieving. It's our inner poverty. Our enthusiasm for achieving is a pure manifestation of our absolute inner poverty. Just as our love of positive thinking is evidence of our complete closure to anything that is real, anything that is helpful, anything that is inspirational. We're close to all of that because the self-construct is inevitably close to all of that. Creativity, spontaneity, generosity. The self-construct is inevitably close to all of that because that's the only way it can get to be the self-construct, is by closing itself off. If it wasn't closed off, it wouldn't be the self-construct. It has to be in that particular way. So in the same way, we are very, very positive, and we like to talk about positive thinking and be optimistic to offset that, to offset the very simple fact that nothing real, nothing meaningful is ever going to happen to the self-concept. Ever, ever, ever. No matter how much talk there is, no matter how much fuss we make about this, it's all just hot air. It's all just froth, designed to distract ourselves from seeing this crucially significant fact, that nothing meaningful, nothing worthwhile, nothing genuinely good is ever going to happen to the self-construct. Ever, ever, ever. Because all that's ever going to happen to the self-construct is that it is going to carry on entertaining itself with its hopes that something good will happen, or its fears that something bad will happen. So it's either hopes or fears, and that's it. And the hopes are just as unrealistic as the fears are. Because the true story is that nothing meaningful, nothing real is ever going to happen, as I keep on saying. It's just blandness or blankness forever and ever and ever. And that's what the life of the self-construct is. Because it has no connection with anything other than itself and its own, which is to say its own projections. So I'm wandering off topic again, but the key point that, if I can, I'd like to come back to, if I can remember what it is, I'd like to come back to it, is that meditation can't be a skill. If it is a skill, there has to be someone there that has learned it and is able to practice it in a skillful way. So here we are, glorifying the self-concept again. It isn't a skill because there's nothing that I'm doing that has a good result. So there's nothing I can do I can't deliberately meditate, in other words. I just can't do it. Yet, because all I know is grasping or controlling, I would endlessly try to do what is impossible to do. And when we start off in meditation, that's kind of okay, because we see ourselves trying to do it. We see it not really working because we're still addicted to thinking and confused by thinking and deluded by thinking and intoxicated by thinking. And we notice all this. So in one way you could say that's really frustrating. But in another way it's really good, because that frustration is great. It helps to chip away at our ridiculous belief in our power to do, in our power to achieve meaningful outcomes. It's a process of disillusionment, in other words. And hand in hand with this process of disillusionment is a change in the energy or dynamic of the situation. So even though I'm continually grasping, continually trying to achieve the outcome, I'm starting to see that that's all just a habit. I'm starting to realize that it's futile. Having awareness of futility there, which is a great thing. I'm sitting there and meditating for half an hour or an hour or whatever. I'm observing the futility of my own action, which is brilliant. And I'm actually taking it on board, even as I go through the motions of trying to be more peaceful or trying to be unattached to my thoughts. This is completely futile. And I'm learning to see that, and that's all good stuff, but that isn't a skill. Being disillusioned, seeing the futility of one's own grasping is not a skill. Now, we could say there is a skill in the sense that I'm going through the motions of the meditation of the mindfulness, watching the breath, and I'm doing this or whatever, and that's fine. But I'm only doing that as a prelude to being disillusioned, losing that automatic, unquestioned belief that I have in myself as someone who can achieve, someone who can bring about meaningful outcomes. And when that disillusionment process has cooked me thoroughly enough, as Ram Dass says, when I've been really well and truly cooked, which can take some time, and often we think we're cooked but we're not, so we have to go back in the oven, then what happens there is evidence of the Buddhist virtue of equanimity. Okay, I probably still am going through the mechanical motions of grasping for stuff, trying to achieve stuff, because of the force of this is incredible. As I keep saying, it's just all I know how to do. But at the same time, when equanimity is there, it means that I couldn't care less whether I succeed or don't succeed.